What's up, guys? Back with podcast episode number 3, and got some special news. We came up with a name finally. We decided to go with the Underdog podcast, mainly just because right now in the podcast and in the YouTube game, we're underdogs compared to higher, bigger channels, and we're just trying to grow and we're trying to grind. To get up to their level, but also you know, we wanted to come up with something that kind of combined all four sports that we're going to talk about: baseball, hockey, basketball, and football. And we thought, there's underdog teams in every single one of those sports. So we decided on that. I hope you guys enjoy the name. And for today's episode, we're going to be going over the AFC North. So we have the Steelers, Bengals, Ravens, and Cleveland Browns in that division. So Copel, without further ado, let's kick it off here with the 4-11-1 Cincinnati Bengals.
So yeah, guys, you already know Cincinnati. They had that number 1 overall pick last year's draft. They drafted LSU's quarterback and Joe Burrow. He was spectacular. And they had the first pick in the second round when they drafted Clemson's wide receiver T. Higgins. So you could tell that they were going all offense. Zach Taylor and that team going all offense. And, they had A.J. Green returning from an injury this coming season. We had Tyler Boyd, he's been a breakout guy. We didn't see much of John Ross. But when you have guys like Green, Higgins, and Boyd, you don't really need a guy like John Ross, who was on the trading block in the year. So overall for the Bengals, not the best season, but I think when they had Joe Burrow on the field, they looked a lot better than the year before. They looked like a team that could compete, especially in the tough AFC North division like we're going to go over. You got 3 playoff teams in this division, and they played every one of them tough. I think Joe Burrow, when he was on the field, he played great. I think that's a positive if you're a Bengals fan. I mean, listen, he's the franchise quarterback for you guys. He's making plays, and I think as a rookie, you got to like what you saw, and who knows the numbers he could have had if he stayed on the field. But about that, I think one thing that this team really needs to sharpen up and build off of is they need an offensive line bad. This team, you got to protect your franchise quarterback. You got to get some run help. I mean, Joe Mixon, he got hurt, but listen, this guy's a good running back. If you get an offensive line, he can stay healthy. You're going to have a really good offense because you're going to be protecting Joe Burrow, and you're going to have, obviously, the offensive line is where the great runs start for teams. So, I mean, if you're a Bengals fan, you got to want to draft some good tackles and guards, I think, this year. Obviously, a lot of people are surrounding the Bengals around Penei Sewell, which, who knows if he'll fall to that pick that they have. But like we said, we'll talk about the draft in another video. But I think the offensive line is a big weakness spot for this team. On the defensive side of the ball, I think that their defense really started off bad. But look at the Steelers game at the end of the year. They played pretty good. I think this defense is a work in progress, but they are decent enough when it comes to playing defense. You know what I mean? Like in big games, they showed up. So that's why I think that this team just needs an offensive line. But let me give you some stats because, 4-11-1, I think you said, not the best record. So when it comes to sacks, this team was a bottom 3 team in the league in sacks. They only had 17 total sacks in the year. So on the defensive side of the ball, what does that tell you? You're not getting pressure off that edge on those blitzes. All right, you got to figure it out. You got to put pressure on other team's quarterback. You can't give them all the time of day in the world to throw the football. So, I mean, the fact that they have 17 total sacks on the year as a team, as a unit defensively, I mean, you got to sharpen up on the pressure on those sacks. But I mean, really just this team, there's not a lot to brag about this year, but I think we knew they weren't going to be playoff contenders right away. I think, listen, when you get a team with a new quarterback, you got to understand you got to progress them. And I think that if Joe Burrow, he played good when he was on the field. T. Higgins, by the way, had a fantastic season, in my opinion, as a rookie. He got the ball a lot. He proved to be a star receiver, in my opinion. I think he can be elite in the future. So there's a lot of good things to talk about for the future for this team, but obviously this year wasn't the year. So we'll see what they do in the draft. We'll see what they do in free agency. Overall, in my opinion, this team, You got to start getting an offensive line, maybe work on the defensive line. But other than that, I mean, teams got a lot to look forward to. I mean, fans, you got a lot to look forward to in Joe Burrow and what he can do with this team when he's healthy. So I'm excited to see it, but just not overall a good year for this team, but in a tough division. What do you got to say?
Yeah, definitely a tough division. I mean, this is, a team that has to play the Browns, twice a year. Same with the Steelers and the Ravens, and all three of those teams, punch their ticket to the playoffs. But I mean, I think these are three teams that each and every single one of them does have a really good chance at the Super Bowl if they continue to play well. And so this is, for the Bengals being that bottom team, I mean, just such a tough division to play in. And then you lose, your guy, Joe Burrow at QB and Joe Mixon. I mean, arguably running back and quarterback are your two most important positions on the field, at least on the offensive side of things. And so, it didn't help that they lost those two guys, but this team definitely needs some work. I thought, your points about the offensive line, I think that's something that they easily have to invest um, in this free agency. And, they do have another high pick. So I think they're going to go with another offensive lineman. I think it should be an easy choice for them since they already, cashed in on Joe Burrow. So they don't have to worry about that. As far as, receivers go, I mean, Tyler Boyd, I thought he had a really strong year, especially when Burrow was at QB. And then T. Higgins, I mean, this guy, I love this guy. He's just made such a big impact already, I think, for this team. And I think he got drafted as their second round pick. So obviously second round, that's a pretty high pick, but I don't think anyone thought he was going to have the year that he did. And I think he had a very strong year for this team and something that was definitely in the positive, and this team also got AJ Green back. I mean, we talk about guys like T.Y. Hilton. You got younger guys like Pittman now on that team, kind of stepping up and maybe getting a bigger role. But it's always nice to have a guy like T.Y. Hilton, A.J. Green, just, they're guys that you can rely on and mentor the young receivers, the young team. I mean, that's always huge. And this team still does have John Ross. I mean, this guy's been battling injuries, but once this team gets completely healthy, if they can upgrade that offensive line, I mean, I think this offense potentially, could have the ability to really just hang with, the top teams, hang with every team in their division. I mean, if you look at their record, it doesn't show that they've played well, but they've really had, some close losses. A Thursday night game in week 2 against the Browns, they lost by 5 points, and obviously it was very early in the season. They did have Joe Burrow, but just a shootout there. And this team, I believe, was like very close to the bottom last season as far as scoring points. They lose by 4 points to a Colts team. That was early in the season too, but then they lose to the Browns again by 3. I mean, a lot of one-score games here with this Bengals team, and I think their defense, was kind of non-existent towards the beginning of the season, but then they started to find their identity, like you talked about in that Steelers game. Just a huge win. I mean, shutting down Big Ben, which I know, this offense was struggling for the Steelers, but shutting down, a quarterback like that in a game like that for the Bengals at home, you're playing for nothing. I mean, that's a huge, huge win for them, So I think they finished off the season pretty strong. They beat the Texans in Houston, and even though they got rolled by the Ravens in that final game, I think they finished, pretty strong, just like the New York Jets. And, this is going to be a huge offseason for them because they're going to have Burrow back. They're going to have Mixon back. And even though, regardless of what happens with this playoffs, whether it's one of the 3 AFC North teams that wins it, I mean, I think this is just going to be another dogfight of a division next year. So the Bengals, they could be in the mix. They might not. We'll have to see how they do over the offseason. And hopefully, Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon and those injuries are ready to go for next season. So, Kopal, you want to talk about your MVP of the season this year for the Bengals?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that there's a couple options here. I think Joe Burrow, to me, is a clear option for MVP. I mean, listen, he didn't play the whole season, but listen, you look at the beginning of the season, like Pat explained, like he got them in these close games. I mean, you got to give the kid credit, especially at that young age as your first year in the league and you don't really have an offensive line. I think you really got to give them credit. But I think because he was hurt and this, Joe Burrow can't really do anything about it. So it's nothing against him. This is kind of like what I said about Tua and Ryan Fitzpatrick in yesterday's video. But I think I'm going to go with T. Higgins as the MVP because, I mean, listen, this guy, to me, he made a lasting impact on this team. Even when Joe Burrow was out, he was getting targets, he was getting receptions, and he was putting up numbers. And when you are a team without your quarterback, I mean, you need a receiver. If you can be a receiver for a backup quarterback that he can kind of rely on and kind of throw the ball, check down to, and just rely on him. I mean, like, would this team even have 4 wins? You know what I mean? And would they even be in those close games without T. Higgins? Because he makes some big plays. So I think just for the idea of like longevity and the fact that he played the whole year, I think he had an outstanding rookie campaign. I think we have to realize that. And I think Joe Burrow was also up there for the MVP because of the work he put in at the beginning of the year. And listen, he got hurt. And I'm not blasting him. I love Joe Burrow. I think he's going to have a fantastic career. I think that just this season, my MVP would have to be T. Higgins just because of the impact that he had when Burrow was out.
I agree with that. I know we've been agreeing a lot on these MVPs, but there's a reason for it. And T. Higgins, he has a resume of reasons why he should be, one of the best players on this team this season. I mean, you could argue, Tyler Boyd, he had just as good as a year. Joe Mixon was injured. Another guy that I think really has stepped up for this team, though, is Giovanni Bernard. He's been on this team for a long time. He's one of those veteran guys. You saw him have that huge game at home against Pittsburgh. Even with this, horrible offensive line and not having Joe Burrow, their quarterback, I think he's definitely stepped up great. But going back to T. Higgins, I mean, he's that check down guy. I think he's been, for all season. He's just such a big target, and he's just out there making plays, of course, for Joe Burrow, who started the year with them, but also for, Ryan Finley, Brandon Allen, these guys that are backup QBs that don't have nearly as much skill as Joe Burrow. And that's why they're backup quarterbacks. But T. Higgins, he's made a lot of plays this season, just as simple as, just picking up first downs or, you get down to the red zone. I mean, this guy's 6'4", that's definitely not small. He's a big target in the end zone. He's scored a bunch of times this season, and I think he's going to have an even bigger season next year. With Burrow back, even if they get Mixon back and they start running the ball more, I mean, this guy's just I think he's going to be one of those guys that, he had a great rookie year. And he's just going to progress and get better and better every season. And, you look at a guy like DK Metcalf, who's been in the year now. Was this his second season or third?
Yep. I think so.
Second season. Second. So, last year, okay, he had a good year. This season, a monster season. He finished the season pretty quiet, but just a monster season for him. And I think that, T. Higgins, it probably will take more than a couple of seasons. And I'm not saying he's going to, be as good as DK Metcalf or have his season, like Metcalf did. But I think that this guy's going to be talked about a whole lot more in the next upcoming years. So T. Higgins, look out for him. But yeah, he's going to be my MVP. And we're going to put the Bengals to rest here. And we're going to go to the next team. So usually, the second team that we talk about, if you realize from yesterday, we talked about the Patriots, a team that didn't make the playoffs. But these two teams, the Ravens and Browns, actually both were 11-5. We'll talk about the Browns quickly right now before the Ravens. But yeah, the Browns, Ravens, and Steelers all made the playoffs. One game, one more win the Steelers had over the Ravens and the Browns. So, Capel, start us off with the Browns. What do you got for Cleveland?
Yeah, so I mean, in my opinion, I was very impressed with the Browns this year. A team, they finally made the playoffs for the first time in ages. And I mean, you got to be happy for them. I think one of the biggest moves that they made and I love the move, was signing Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota for their head coach. I think that this guy is a phenomenal football coach. I think that what he can do, like he can show you, he can kind of change a franchise around because listen, Freddie Kitchens was coach last year. And this team, you can talk all about the talent they had. They had all this talent, basically the same, but he can't do anything with it. Now you bring in a guy like Kevin Stefanski coming from Minnesota, and he flips his team around. He makes the playoffs. Unfortunately, we obviously just got news that he can't coach in the wild card game against Pittsburgh. So that's a blow, in my opinion, because I think he's a great play caller on both sides of the ball for this team, and he's just coached his team well. But we're not talking about playoffs; we're talking about the regular season. So, in my opinion, if you're a Browns fan, you have to hammer this season as a success. I mean, you go 11-5 and you in a tight AFC playoff race, and you make it and you pull out and win those games. I mean, and think about all the adversity that this team has gone through. I mean, Odell, he got hurt in the middle of the year. So you didn't have your top target. Baker didn't have his top target. And think about the game against the Jets where they lost, but they had all their receivers out due to injuries. Baker Mayfield, I think he stepped up and took a huge leadership role. We know this guy loves to win. We know this guy is serious about making the playoffs, and he doesn't like to lose. And you love seeing him make it after all the hard work he puts in. You know, he even stepped up in that game against the Jets and said, hey, we lost that game, but you can't be blaming the receivers. Like, they're practice squad guys. Like, it's my job to step up and make the plays. And he's taking accountability and everything that he needs to do to make sure his team is winning and following Coach Stefanski and doing what they do best. So I think that is something good. I think another thing, like, let's take a look at this offense. They signed Austin Hooper, the tight end from Atlanta. He makes a big impact. You know, they have him. Harrison Bryant, you know, the young tight end, he comes in. He's a great secondary option. Njoku played a couple snaps. So, I mean, you have a great tight end group there. And the receivers, obviously, Odell's great. He got hurt in the middle of the year, though. Jarvis Landry, he stepped up, and he became a really big target for Baker Mayfield, which you love to see because we knew in Miami this kid had talent. And, you know, they brought up guys, they had guys like Rashad Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones come in, and just guys that made plays and were in, like, it kind of reminds me of, like, receivers from, like, the old Patriots. Like, you know, you don't have to be a big name guy to make plays. You know that system, you know the schemes. Stefanski puts them in. Baker finds them. They run the right routes. They're making these plays. Spectacular job by Stefanski, like I said, and just this offense really coming along together. I think they had a great offensive line, which is something good if you're a Browns fan, because when you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt in the backfield, I mean, you better have a top rushing attack in the league, and they did. They made a statement. Nick Chubb was out for a couple of weeks, but it doesn't matter because when he came back better than ever. He made really good plays. Kareem Hunt, you know, he was more of a receiving back, but still he got a lot of carries too. I mean, just a lot of, you know, that helps Baker Mayfield out too. You know, when you have a great run game, it opens up the pass game. So I say a great offense by this team, but not only that, let's talk about the defense. I mean, this defense played out of its mind. I think it was a really underrated defense. The run defense from this team is top tier, in my opinion. That defensive line led by Myles Garrett, this defense, they know what they're doing. And, you know, you had guys like Denzel Ward at corner that was out for a couple of games, but listen, like, they have good backs. They have good linebackers. They have a great defensive line. This defense is nothing to sleep on. Please, guys, you have to understand this defense is no joke. And in my opinion, for the Browns going 11-5 with a brand new head coach, and he leads his team to the playoffs right away in a really tight AFC playoff race. I mean, this season has to be a W if you're a Browns fan. You should be really happy, and regardless of what happens in the playoffs, which I think that they can go far, but this season, talking about regular season only, this has to be a dub. Let me just give you a couple stats for this team before Pat, you go, because I think I've basically said everything except let me just tell you this. So the Browns, they had a top 3 rushing attack in the league. They were the 3rd rushing attack in the league, averaging 148.4 rushing yards a game. So, you know, like I said, that ground game opens up the pass game. It's good stuff from the Browns. Just really, really good stuff to see if you're a Browns fan with that rushing attack. And, you know, I think if they had OBJ, their passing attack would have even been more lethal. But, you know, what can you do? They still were not they were a good offense all around, led by the rushing. And credit to the offensive line, credit to Coach Stefanski. I mean, that's really all I got to say. I got to say this team, if you're a Browns fan, it's a W. You know, great offense, great defense, and a tight playoff race. You made it. You earned the playoff spot. Great year from Cleveland.
I just want to start off by saying with these Browns, I mean, you know, home sweet home. If you look at this team, great 11 wins on the season, 6-2 at home. That puts them at 5-3 on the road, which is good as well. But this team just really, when they came home, I mean, almost automatic. Just 6-2. It's always great when a team's playing really well at home. And I think, the Browns have mastered that. I mean, they get that big win. They put into the playoffs against the Steelers. Now, they weren't starting Big Ben and most of their starters, but this team, when they're, playing at home, I mean, there's a good chance that they're going to come out with a W. Their only two losses at home was week 1 when they got blown out against the Ravens. And then they, no, when's their other loss? Oh, and actually both games to the Ravens. So 38-6 against the Ravens at home in week 1, which it's week 1 and it was a blowout. I'm pretty sure it was horrible weather in that game. And then this Monday night matchup, 47-42. I think it was looking like it was going to head to overtime possibly, right?
Yeah,
Or
Lamar
maybe,
Jackson came out of the tunnel.
and then I mean, just Lamar Jackson just doing his thing. I mean, that's the type of year that he's had in those Ravens, and I mean, we'll talk about that next. But yeah, the Browns, they've been dominant at home. A couple of guys that I think have really stepped up. Baker Mayfield. Talk about dog pound. This guy, he's a dog. Baker Mayfield, he's been, unreal this season for this team. Last year, 22 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, 78.8% passer rating. This season, 26 touchdowns, just 8 interceptions, 95.9 passer rating. So that just shows you how much, this guy's improved. I mean, he's just trying to get better, and it's evident. He got help in the head coach, got some good receivers, but this guy, he's a workhorse. We've seen that, and this isn't a guy that's passing for 300, 400 yards every game. I mean, this is a guy that's efficient with his throws. He doesn't have to throw for a whole lot of yards to put up a whole lot of points. He's been excellent this season. Another guy I think that's been huge, Nick Chubb, breakout season. I mean, this guy was injured last season, I believe, right? Didn't he have a season-ending injury?
Nick Chubb.
Yeah.
I
Or
believe he. I believe
I
he.
think it was last year or the year before, I think.
Yeah, he's dealt with some injuries. Even this year, he was out for 4 weeks or something. So
Yeah. So, he had a little bit of a minor injury this season. He's been dealing with injuries pretty much since he's gotten to the league. But he's just, I mean, just such a smart running back, and this offensive line has gotten better. I'll give it to them. But, Nick Chubb, he doesn't just run just to truck people over, and no offense to Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry just runs to run through guys. I mean, and that's working for him. So he can just keep doing his thing. 2K yards this season. That's unbelievable. But we'll talk about that once we get the AFC South in here. But anyway, Nick Chubb, this guy just runs, and he runs smart. He's looking for the holes every single play, every single time he gets a touch. And I mean, there's another guy right behind him, or right next to him, I should say. Kareem Hunt. He's more of a pass catching back, but same with him. I mean, these two just run with authority. And if it's not Baker Mayfield, making the play downfield to Odell or Jarvis Landry, it's going to be Nick Chubb, or it's going to be Kareem Hunt. So, I think these guys have been great, and they've been a huge part of the Browns having the season that they have this year. Congrats to them on making the playoffs. It's about time, as everyone in Cleveland would say. And people may be saying, oh, it's the Browns. They just snuck in. They still have the Ravens and Steelers in their division who they have to worry about. And then, you've got the Bills, the Chiefs, blah, 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 all the other 1 seeds. But I think this team, I mean, they're called the Dogs for a reason. And their Dogs going in on Sunday to Heinz Field, I think they can really, make some plays and shake that game up and probably shake this playoffs up. But I'm going to go with, for my MVP of the season, Baker Mayfield, stepping up, finally giving the Browns a season to remember. Browns fans, the dog pound, this is why they drafted him. Here you go, Browns fans. Here's your opportunity. So, Copel, who's your MVP of this Browns team this season?
Yeah, so I think you hit on some great points there. And as much as I love big head coach guy, I love coaching. I think Stefanski just comes in and does a great job, but he's not a player, and I can't give him the MVP. I think the most valuable player, I have to agree with you, is Baker Mayfield. I think that you just have to give it to this guy. He's been doubted for a while, saying like he got drafted number one, like he's not even making the playoffs. He's proving now. Listen, this guy gets a head coach that's, you know, even he's better than decent, but Freddie Kitchens was awful. So, I mean, you give this guy a coach that is just decent and he's going to make some plays. And like we said, yeah, he has OBJ. Yeah, he has Jarvis Landry, but he didn't have OBJ for the second half of the year. And look at what he did with this team. He made plays with guys that people barely even know. So I think that, taking that into account, if the Browns didn't have Baker Mayfield, do you really think that they would be in the playoffs right now? I doubt it. I think that he easily has the most value to this team right now. You can make a case that Myles Garrett on that defensive end is a really valuable player, which I think he's probably the most valuable defensive player on the team. But all around, I just don't see this team making the playoffs without Baker Mayfield. So hats off to him. What a great year he had. Let's hope that, him and his team play good in the playoffs.
So the next team here in the AFC North, they also finished with an 11-5 record. They do have a higher seed than the Browns. Yeah, they do have a higher seed than the Browns. But yeah, so this team right in the mix here, and another team just with a strong season. First thing I want to talk about with these guys, is the first thing that comes before every NFL season, and this was this year's past draft. There's not a whole lot of teams that had as good as a draft as these guys did, or at least how these, players panned out. Patrick Queen, the linebacker out of LSU, huge season. I mean, he is up there for Defensive Player of the Year. Chase Young's been unbelievable for that Washington football team, but Patrick Queen probably right behind him, and he probably has a solid case too for Defensive Player of the Year, maybe even Rookie of the Year. Also, J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State. They have other running backs like Gus Edwards, Mark Ingram. So, J.K. Dobbins, his role, nobody really knew what it was going to be going into the season. I drafted this guy right from the get-go in fantasy, but I knew he probably wasn't going to be, that starting back right away, and he was going to have to prove himself. And I think he's absolutely done that. He's taken advantage of his opportunities, and the Ravens, gave him a couple opportunities. He panned out well. And so what do they do towards the end of the season when, the playoff lives their playoff ticket on the line, must win games. They put him out there and he just impresses him more and more. Devin Duvernay, the wide receiver out of Texas, has also been great when he's been getting opportunities. And Malik Harrison on that scary defense with Patrick Queen, the linebacker out of Ohio State, picked 98th in the third round, just 6 picks after Devin Duvernay. He's been making plays out there at the linebacker position. But we got to talk about one man, and if you guys know anyone on this Ravens roster, Lamar Jackson. I mean, this guy is just a workhorse. I don't even know what to call him. I don't know if we should call him, a quarterback or a running back or what. But this guy, and when you talk, since you have more time, I want you to, see how many yards he averages on the ground per game. But I mean, that's just ridiculous. What he's doing with this team. He's turning, the quarterback position into just giving it more. He's just what he does, the way that he plays quarterback. It's unlike anyone else, and it's honestly, like, you could make an argument it's unlike anyone that's ever been the quarterback, the way that he does it, running the ball. I mean, this guy is just running for pretty much 100 yards or more every single season, every single game this year. He's scoring touchdowns on the ground and in the air, just carrying this offense. He has guys like Mark Andrews, Snead, but, he doesn't have like a really big receiver that just he can rely on pretty much every single play. This guy has been this team's offense. He has some help along the way, but this guy is, the Ravens offense, and he is the reason why they're in the spot that they are. A guy that I think has pretty much underperformed, I guess, this season is Marquise Brown. I had high hopes for him to continue up from his rookie season and have another big year. And, he showed some progress as the season, got later into the year. But I mean, I'm just a little disappointed in his performance. I don't know if it's just he's not getting the ball enough or he's not making the plays when the opportunities come his way. But I think that, he's a guy that they're going to have to get going if they're going to have a playoff run. I mean, there's not time to make mistakes in the playoffs. And Marquise Brown is going to have to be part of this offense if they're going to have any chance. I love that they're bringing in Des Bryant, and he's been, making plays when he can. They still have Mark Ingram. Now, I think J.K. Dobbins, he's probably going to be the starting back or at least getting most of the snaps or the carries for this team come kickoff. But, they do have a guy like Mark Ingram on the bench who has been in this situation. And I'm sure, this team is looking for revenge if you look at their matchup against the Titans after last season, especially. So this team probably one of the most hungry teams. Just because of that history that they have. And then this defense has been consistent throughout the years. And I think that, they're not the best defense, but they're also definitely not the worst. Strong defense. And like I said earlier, some great draft picks that they've had. I mean, they're, giving up 3 points to a Bengals team, which, week 17, not a strong offense, but, this defense really is just, besides giving up 34 to the Chiefs, I mean, they really just haven't had a bad game at all, pretty much. But anyway, Copel, what's your point of view on this?
Yeah, so I like the points you made, and I know you told me to check this out, so I just looked it up. So Lamar Jackson had 1,005 rushing yards this season on the ground. So, I mean, as a quarterback, he's getting over 1,000 yards. In 37 career regular season games, he's averaging 206 rushing yards a game in his regular season career as a quarterback. So right there, that's going to tell you something.
That's more than half of the starting running backs in the NFL.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly.
I mean,
so
that shows you he's just transforming the quarterback position like nobody's ever done it before. So he's just a special guy to watch.
He is. He's definitely a special guy to watch. And so I'll just give you guys a rundown about the Ravens. So I think it's very clear that Lamar Jackson he's good at what he does. He's a star on this team. He's a star in the league. Let me just say once again, let me bring up the head coach, John Harbaugh. I think he's a great coach. He has a great resume. You've seen him over the years. He won a Super Bowl in 2012 against San Fran, against his brother, coaching that team. But just the way this guy does, he had a great season last season. Obviously, they got upset in the playoffs by Tennessee. This year, there's a chance they don't make the playoffs. What shocker? Why is everyone saying they're not making it? What do you know if they come out, they pull through? They, like you said, they punch their ticket to the AFC playoffs in a tight race with all these teams fighting to make the playoffs. He does it, and we know the backbone of the Ravens offense, it's been through the years, and it's more than ever now, is the rushing offense. I can just tell you right now, they led the league in rushing yards per game with 191.9 rushing yards a game. So that's obviously combined from just the entire rushing crew. So, we took a look at Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position, and we know how lethal he is in the rushing game. He's fast. He's got that breakout speed. He's got that big time, play in the open field, the moves he can do. When we talk about the rookie J.K. Dobbins, this guy, he didn't really play a lot at the beginning of the year. He comes in and makes a huge impact. Like you said, I think he's going to be a stud in this league, a superstar. He's just finding all the holes to run through, and he's making the most of it when they need him the most in the playoff race. He pulls through. Gus Edwards, a very underrated running back, in my opinion. This guy was a kind of guy where you pull him in, you put him in, and on different plays, and he's just a run up the gut type of guy that he's going to get you 10, 15 yards on just one carry. He's a good power back. So in my opinion, great backfield. Mark Ingram, we haven't really seen him much since these two guys took over in the running game. When you have Lamar Jackson, I mean, that's basically 3 running backs right there. And let me tell you, the offensive line, they had a couple of injuries. Obviously, Yonda's gone. They had a couple of injuries. throughout that offensive line. And what you, like we said, you can't have a rushing game without an offensive line. So the offensive line, I think it actually could be a little bit better for the Ravens, but you really can't complain when they have the best rushing attack in the league. So, I mean, that being said, I think the backbone of the rushing thing is people forget about Picard, the fullback on this team, who's just a really good lead blocker. He's a really good run blocker. He really helps out this team run. And listen, people don't realize what fullbacks do for teams in the running game. And this guy this year, especially on the film I watched, he really made an impact on the running game. He was lead blocking for these guys. He was making space. He was like a part of the offensive line. And that's something you'd like to see. Now, let me give you a stat that Ravens fans are probably not going to be fans of, but they were at the bottom of the league and bottom of the AFC. They were the worst AFC team when it came to passing. Yes, even worse than the Patriots. I don't believe it. But yep, they averaged 171.2 passing yards per game. So the passing game, you're ranking at the bottom of the league when it comes to passing yards. So people that play against this team are going to realize, listen, they're just a ground and pound run team. There's really nothing that they can throw to. Now, let's just say Mark Andrews, a really top tier tight end in the league. He's making a case for it. I think he's a really valuable player on this team. So Lamar Jackson, I think that is his top target. Like you said, you go to the receiver side of the ball, Marquise Brown had a down year for me. I thought he would have a breakout year, something to prove with Lamar Jackson after winning MVP. I thought this connection was going to be lethal. I mean, this guy dropped passes that, anyone could catch. And I mean, he's who knows what it is. He's still young, but just a little disappointed in the way he's played. I mean, they had like guys like Miles Boykin come in. They signed Des Bryant to the practice squad. He ends up cracking the roster towards the end of the year. So, I mean, just guys, basic receivers, Duvernay, like you talked about, the rookie out of Texas. I mean, there's not really a number one receiver there in Baltimore. So other than Mark Andrews, I mean, listen, if you want, I think what the Ravens need to do, they need to find a top tier receiver to give to Lamar Jackson, because he can't just rely on Mark Andrews all the time in the run game. You need to have a little bit of both, because what does the run game do? It opens up the passing game. We talk about it all the time. So I think if you're a Ravens fan, you got to see in the free agency or the draft, if you can snag a top tier receiver or even like an all-star receiver, just somebody that you can give Lamar Jackson to just check the ball down to when he needs to. You know what I mean? Because this rushing attack is spectacular. You got Mark Andrews there. You got great running backs. I think this team needs some receivers. On the defensive side of the ball, let me say this team is always known as having a good defense. And not to take away anything from them, but I'm just going to say my opinion here. I think that the Baltimore Ravens have had a down defensive season. So in that case, I mean, it's not like they played bad defense, because like I said, you need a good defense to make the playoffs. And I mean, they had a couple injuries. Like I'm pretty sure Marlon Humphrey got hurt for a couple games this year. They had a couple big injuries, but like, as far as defense goes, like this team was locked down last year. I just didn't see the same lockdown defense from this team. Now, this team has a good defense, but I'm talking about superstar defense. I just didn't see it from them. I would take the Browns defense over them. I'd also take the Steelers defense over them in that division. So I'd put them third in their division defensively. But listen, there's nothing to take away. They still have a good defense, but when it comes playoff time, I'd like to see a little bit more out of that defense. But other than that, I mean, this team, listen, they snuck into the playoffs. They played great at the end of the year, and I think you got to go off of recency and how consistent they've been recently. And I think that they have showed that they are a consistent team recently on both sides of the football. So that's good going into the playoffs. If you're a Ravens fan, I would say that this is a good season. You got to hammer it as a good season. Obviously, it's not as good as last year, but I think that when you take into account everything, you got to count the season as a win. You make the playoffs, you're 11-5, you have a above 500 record. You got to take it as a win. So, in my opinion, this is a win for me.
I think that's, the goal too. I mean, if you're not playing for that number one seed, the goal is just to make it to the playoffs. Everyone says it. You get into the playoffs, it's a new season. It doesn't matter what happened. And so even though, this Ravens team didn't win as many games and doesn't look as strong, I mean, that's criticism. And you know what? If people are saying that, they could just use that to fuel them. I mean, they're, focused on this matchup right now against the Titans because of, they got embarrassed pretty much. Last game that they played against them. I think that, like you said, this defense really is going to have to be better in the playoffs. I mean, they, weren't as good as they were last year and as they have been in the past. They have been facing some injuries, but this team is really, they're going to have to come out, I'd say, flying against the Tennessee Titans. I don't think that their defense is going to win them this game. It's going to be who's going to be able to score the most amount of points. And if you look, Tennessee is number 4 in the NFL in points scored per game. And at number 7, there you go, there's Baltimore. So they're pretty close, but they're behind. But anyway, I'll get to my MVP of this season, of this team for this season, and then we'll go to the Steelers. I got Lamar Jackson. I don't think this team would be in this position, if that injury that he sustained against Cleveland was, a serious injury that he couldn't come back in. I don't think they would have won that game. Maybe there's a couple of games, even though they had, the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Bengals, 3 horrible teams to end out the season. I mean, they may not have been the spot that they were. They took some tough losses to the Pats, lost a close one to the Titans. But I think this guy is just Lamar Jackson. He's really done a really good job, carrying this team, doing it in the air and on the ground. And nobody's really been able to stop them. They've played good defenses, the Titans, the Steelers, throw the Eagles in there. The Chiefs, their defense isn't too bad. I mean, look at them, 14-2. And of course, the Browns, nobody's been able to stop this guy. So he's going to be my MVP, and he's going to be the reason why this team does anything in the playoffs if they do. So that's why I will leave that conversation. And for our last team of the episode, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. They finished first in the AFC North by just 1 victory, so it was very close. 12-4 to close out the season, 11-0 to start the season. So, yeah, 1-3, or excuse me, 1-4 to end the year. Not great. I mean, there was, people saying this team was going to finish 16-0 and take that first seed away from the Chiefs. Obviously, that doesn't happen. They don't even get the second one. Buffalo gets the second one. But, we talked about how good the Browns were at home this season at 6-2. Well, this team was better, 7-1 at home. I mean, they, dominated at home. They were great. Only losing 1 game at Heinz Field. And I think, this defense really just had a huge year for this team, really had a huge year. I know that the offense, Big Ben, they've got all those receivers and he has all those options, and it was clicking at the beginning of the season. But I think this whole entire season has just been carried by this defense making plays. I mean, this team has been in so many one-score games, close games, coming down the wire, and this defense has just stepped up and made plays, especially in those last couple of games. And the reason why this team went 1-4, in my opinion, to close out the season was because they couldn't get anything going on offense. Even against the Ravens on that Wednesday night game, I know the COVID issues with the Ravens put that game on Wednesday evening, just a weird time. Steelers walked away as 5-point winners. That very much could have been the other way around. And I think, the defense is the reason why they get the win. Washington, I mean, they lose by 6 points. And that's the offense isn't there. I mean, 17 points usually doesn't win you a football game in the NFL, especially when you're playing the Washington football team, who does not score a lot of points. You're losing to a Bengals team, which, they played really hard that game. If you're looking at the Bengals side of things, like we talked about, but you don't show up in the first half. I'm sorry, but if you don't play a full game of football, I mean, there's just no way that you're going to win. They came out, started the half great, and they played a pretty strong half, 17 points in that second half of that game. But, I mean, if you don't play a full game of football, it's very unlikely that you win the game. And same thing here against the Buffalo Bills. The defense kept them in it, but the offense just giving them no chance. And then, a very lucky comeback against the Cincinnati Colts. But again, where's the offense in the first half? The Colts are up, 24-7 at halftime? I mean, come on, this offense is really going to have to step up and make plays if they're going to have any chance. And a lot of people are thinking, even at 12-3, after they saw the way they closed out the season, I mean, a lot of people think that this Steelers team has a really good chance, with the veteran presence, with Juju, with Big Ben. And, Deontay Johnson has stepped up huge. James Washington. But, I mean, this team really needs to work on the offensive side of the ball. And, the biggest thing, though, that for me that we haven't even touched on yet is the run game. I know that James Conner's been injured, whatever, for, he had COVID, injuries. You got to go to guys like Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland. But, I mean, absolutely no run game. And this is a team that doesn't have a half-bad offensive line. I mean, it's definitely not where they shine at the offensive line position, but absolutely no run game. And that's what scares me the most for this team. If you look at playoffs, I mean, we just talked about the Browns, Myles Garrett, that defensive, that D line for the Browns could be, the best part of that defense. And there's absolutely no way the Steelers are going to be able to run. And from what we've seen, especially to close out the year, I mean, they can't even play a full game on the offensive side of the ball. And if they're only passing, that's the only thing that the Browns are going to have to adjust and play defense on. I mean, this could be an easier win for the Browns than we think. But the Steelers, I mean, they also have, an offense that when it's clicking, it's clicking. I mean, Juju, Deontay, like I just said, I mean, these guys, if they're catching the ball, two very quick guys that can, get up the field. I mean, you look at Juju and Deontay, most of their, receptions are just short little 5 or less yard passes. And then boom, they just run for 10, 20 yards or even to the house. I mean, that's how they've scored most of their touchdowns. This team isn't a team that throws the deep ball most of the time. But Big Ben, he's going to have to be sharp and on his game for this Sunday night affair at home at Heinz Field. I mean, it's at their home. They're 7-1 at home this season. So that's also on their side, that they've been great at home. Their only loss, like we said, came against Washington at Heinz Field. But we'll have to see what the Steelers get. Are we going to get, the offensive shootout game, or are we going to get, one team comes to play, at least in the first half? So we'll have to see here. Copel, what's your side of things here in Steelers Nation?
So before I talk about the Steelers, I didn't give my MVP for the Ravens, but I'm going to just say that really quick. It's Lamar Jackson. I mean, Pat literally hit the head on the nail with everything about him. I mean, there's no way the Ravens would be in the playoffs without this guy, so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But now moving on to the Steelers, all the points you made, great points. I would say the exact same thing. So I'm just going to go off of kind of what you just said. So I'm going to start off with the weaknesses of this team, because I think that it's very evident what the weakness is, and it's the rushing. This offensive line isn't terrible, but it's not helping. And listen, James Conner, I know he's been injured and stuff, but he really hasn't been particularly playing well. Let me just tell you that this team was the worst team in the entire league when it came to rushing yards per game. They averaged 84.4 rushing yards per game. That was the worst of any team in the league. So if you're a Steelers fan, I mean, what do you got to say about that? That's not good. And to me, the run game, like I always say, it opens up the passing game. It works this offense. It works the offense for any team, especially in the playoffs. So I take a look at the games like Washington, Buffalo, Cincinnati, the games that Pittsburgh lost in the second half of the year, where they were getting stopped by every defense, 3 and out sometimes, because they were losing yards off of runs, and then Roethlisberger would have to just huck it down the field, and it would be like 4th and 14, 4th and 12, because he can't hit a 14-yard pass, because, I mean, when you put your quarterback in that situation, it's not going to help every time. So listen, if this happens in the playoffs, they're doomed, because Cleveland has a great run defense. They have a great defense all around, and if their offense is clicking, I mean, game over. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We already talked about that. So obviously their weakness is in the rushing game. Listen, in my opinion, Mike Tomlin is a great coach. He's one of the best in the league. I think he should make the Hall of Fame as a head coach, but some play calls were a little questionable at the second half of the year, but I'm not questioning him on that, because I know he's a great coach. He's got a great resume. We just can't question coaches like that. They have a reason for everything. But listen, Ben Roethlisberger, he comes back from injury after having Mason Rudolph at quarterback last year. I mean, he has a pretty decent year because, I mean, your team goes 11-0 at the start and then stuff starts to fall, but he had a pretty good year on offense. We can tell he's getting old because, he's not vintage Big Ben where he's rolling out of the pocket and throwing it when he needs to when pressure comes. You can tell that when teams get pressure on this guy, they're making him uncomfortable and throwing that football away. So that's a downside, but that happens with every quarterback. But listen, like Pat said, great receivers on this team. You got Juju, you got Deontay Johnson, who's had a great year in my opinion. You got Claypool, the rookie, who has been playing fantastic, and then you got James Washington, a guy that is really good as well, underrated. So you got the options there, and then tight end you got Vance McDonald, so more of a blocking tight end. But when you have four receivers that can catch the ball, that really isn't an issue. So the passing offense is pretty good in this team. I think the offense all around is mediocre, only because I think that run defense just pulls the weight down from that. Now, obviously, one thing I'd like to talk about defensively, I mean, this team is a defensive powerhouse. I'm going to use this word for this defense because it just is. This team, literally, in my opinion, probably could have gone undefeated or even close to that if Bud Dupree stayed in the defense. I know Bud Dupree's not like a superstar, but he made a lot of plays on that defense. He got hurt. But when this defense was rolling at the beginning of the year, they were rolling, and they kept them in the games where they went 1-4 at the end of the year. So this defense is highly, highly, highly respected around the league, and I think it's the one of the best defenses, if not the best in the league. I have numbers to prove it. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick leads this team on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, second-year player. I mean, what a player he is. He showed it last year. He's showing it again this year, just improving every year. Let me give you some defensive stats from this team. Okay, the NFL leader in sacks was TJ Watt. He was first with 15. So, you got that guy off the edge. TJ Watt, he becomes a beast. He has been a beast, leads the league in sacks with 15. Turnover differential, the Steelers are +9 when it comes to the turnover department and the differential. So your defense is getting turnovers. They were tied in third in the league with turnovers with 9 +9. They're tied with Miami and New Orleans Saints with 9. So you're getting turnovers, you're getting sacks, stuff like that. So let me give you some other stats. I already told you about the rushing yards, but I'm here to talk about some defense. Defensive yards, the Steelers were third in the league, so giving up yards on the defensive side of the ball. They only gave up 305.8 per game, which is third best in the league behind like the Rams and somebody else, so that's a plus. And sacks, the Steelers led the league in sacks. They had 56 total sacks as a team. So you look at Cincinnati, who we talked about at the beginning of this video. They had 17 as a team. TJ Watt had 15 himself. This team had 56 as a team. So they're blitzing. They're getting pressure. They're making quarterbacks uncomfortable. And like I said, good defenses win you Super Bowls, win you games. So I think if you look at that as a Steelers fan, this defense is your best part of your team by far. And I mean, it's really good. It's playing up to par. So, all those stats aside and what you can see from it, their defense puts up really good defensive numbers, but I think it wins them games. And in my opinion, I'll just say it now, if I had to pick an MVP for this team, it's going to be TJ Watt. I just think that he is a big centerpiece on this defense and leading the league in sacks at 15. I mean, he's putting pressure on quarterbacks, but he's getting interceptions. He's making a lot of plays off the line of scrimmage that a lot of edges don't really do. I'd say another edge that you really put up there is like maybe Nick Bosa. But other than that, I mean, there's not a lot of guys that you see are complete defensive player. Whatever you want to do, drop back in coverage, get an interception, get a sack, blitz them. You know what I mean? Get these runs, sack them, do a tackle for loss. I mean, this guy can really do it all. And I think that if they didn't have him on the defense, this defense wouldn't be as good. And I think that the reason this team is good is because of their defense, like I said. So I think if I had to pick an MVP, it would be TJ Watt on the defensive side of the ball. If I'm a Steelers fan, listen, I would hammer this season as a big W because you came off of an 8-8 year where you didn't have Roethlisberger, and now your team is 12-4, winning the AFC North in a division that literally has 3 playoff teams, which is basically incredible. So obviously, ending the season 1-4 is scary, but you win the division, you make the playoffs. How can the season not be a win? My MVP for this team is TJ Watt, and that's all I really got to say about the Steelers. Good season for them.
So as much as we've talked about how this offense has struggled, especially towards the end of the season in the last couple of games, I will say Juju, we had 97 receptions, 831 yards. That's not too bad of a season. They're, as good as I think that is, for receptions, and that's the second most he's had in his 4-year career. I think, Big Ben, if they had done a better job in staying on the field, he definitely could have had more receptions, which would have led to more yards and possibly more wins. But also, right beside him, usually in that slot area, Deontay Johnson. I mean, this man, he's only been in the season for 2 years, but boy, did he have a season to remember for himself. 59 receptions in 2019 and 88 here in 2020, or last year in 2020. So that just shows, the confidence that he's having for himself. Now, he has dropped a lot of passes. He probably could have had closer to 100 for sure. But it just shows, the confidence that he's getting and the confidence that Big Ben is getting, trusting his other receivers with the ball and making plays down the field. So with those stats, I think Coppell did a really good job covering on the defensive side of the ball. And for my MVP of the Pittsburgh Steelers this season, I'm going to go with TJ Watt. This guy had a defensive player of the year type of season. I mean, I would say MVP, but, there's just so many guys on the offensive side of the ball that have done, a lot. So it'd be tough to give it to him. But, I think he's been excellent on the defensive side of the ball and definitely the top guy on this defense, just getting to whatever quarterback. I mean, it doesn't matter what offensive line he's going up against. He's still, giving his all every play, and he's making plays. And it just shows that Steelers sack streak is still alive. I don't have the exact number right now, Kopel, if maybe you could look that up. But, this sack streak is still alive for this team. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, the amount of games consecutively, you get sacks no matter if you're going up against a guy like Lamar Jackson, who just senses if a guy's, getting close to him, and he just will sprint up the field for 50 yards, or a guy like Cam Newton, who loves taking sacks, as we Patriots fans know, or Tom Brady. So it doesn't really matter. But TJ Watt, the point is, he's had an excellent season. I think he's going to have an excellent playoffs, whether it goes one game or it goes the full four for this team. We'll have to see. I think this defense is definitely going to be the reason why they go far if they do. And this offense, though, they really have to improve and they have to step up. And it's going to be tough to just, turn around and go off in the playoffs after that horrible finish that they had to the season. But like they say, the playoffs is the new season. So that's all I got for the Steelers. Copel, did you find that stat, or are we?
Yeah. So as of December 15th, it says that the Steelers have 70 straight sacks in regular season games. So 70 straight games with a sack. I mean, come on. I mean,
yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's, there's 16 games in a season. So that's over 4 seasons that they've done. So just an unreal stat for that Steelers defense. And that's a huge reason why they're 12-4. They get a great seed in the playoffs. But that's going to be it from us today here. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast today. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Thanks for riding with us. And once again, the Underdog podcast, we're here. We're going to be grinding. So thank you so much for the support, guys. And we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.